Good morning.
Good morning.
Go ahead and turn to Job chapter 30. And while you're turning, I just want to challenge those of you who were not here Wednesday night. I want to challenge you for not being here. For those who were here, what was that video like?
It was good.
Yeah, one guy even took it home and his wife watched it, and she chastised me this morning for not warning her that she needed to have Kleenex for the end of the video. So I've got a collection of videos. We're going to concentrate on those for a while. It's a pretty good collection. To give you an idea how good, one of the elders at the church in Montana, when I left, said, "You are going to leave your DVDs behind, aren't you?" So I didn't. They're here, and I cherry pick. So it's some of the best stuff you've probably ever seen. What we're describing is a video called Fruitcake and Ice Cream. And it's by a guy named Louis Giglio, who speaks to something in the neighborhood of 25,000 youth each and every year, several times a year, at these things called passion conferences. And he's just an excellent speaker, and they always have top-notch talent. Which brings up an announcement for our young people, and that is we're going to try and do the TCTC again. And I'd really love to take some of our young people to TCTC, and I never like for it to be costly for them. So for those of us that would love to be able to help support a young person going, it's in Gatlinburg, so it's not a big challenge for us, but it'd be great if you'd just add a little extra to your tithe and just say, this is for our youth to be able to go. By the way, on Wednesday night, there is one other thing that you missed out on. You missed out on a great food. However, those of us who were here missed out on some great food too. There's a certain Cadillac that ended up with 6 pounds of sloppy Joe mix in the back of the Cadillac. And when I say in the back of the Cadillac, I don't mean it was in the container. I mean the Cadillac was the container. And it smelled wonderful. But yeah, Wednesday night was interesting. So just so you know, we're finishing up on a series of sermons on the power of story. And we're concentrating on one particular story in the Bible, and it's the story of Job. And there's a lot that we can learn from the book of Job. But you know, we've been looking at his story, paralleling it to modern day life and some of the challenges of modern day life. Last week was about struggles. This week, it asks a question, and so we're going to attempt to answer the question today. And it goes like this: does God care? Have you ever heard anybody who's going through challenges that asks that question? Now, as there are some people, I was telling a couple of guys in Montana about, I love Philip Yancey. I think he's one of the best modern writers we've got. But some people are challenged by Philip Yancey. And one of the reasons they're challenged by him is he is not afraid to ask hard questions. And his walk with Christ has been one that has been full of hard questions. And that's problematic for some people. Some people just think that is, just, it amounts to blasphemy, that you would say, one of his books is, "What's so amazing about grace?" You know, and "What good is God?" And those titles just seem, can you ask that question? Even my title this morning, "Does God really care?" Is that a good question? Well, you do realize that chapter 38 makes it very obvious that not only did Job's friends step on God's toes, but Job himself stepped on God's toes. So chapter 30 is this long dissertation by Job. And the portion we're going to look at this morning is what got Job in trouble. And he does, well, let's see if he steps on God's toes. So let's look at it. Does God care? Verse 20. Now this is Job. He's the I. The you that he's referring to is God. And let's just ask if this first verse kind of steps on somebody's toes. I cry to you for help. I, Job, cry to you, God, for help. And you do not answer me. Uh-oh. Did you catch the problem there? I stand and you only look at me. So what's Job doing here? Are you listening, God? And why is he asking the question? You know, this is chapter 30. By the, just the beginning of the book of Job, he's lost his family except for a nagging wife. He's lost his income. He's lost his wealth. He's even lost his health. And he's sitting in a pile of ashes. By the way, his health problem is so severe that the text indicates that maybe one of the reasons he's sitting outside the city gates and in an ash heap is because his ailment, his physical ailment, is so poor that he can no longer commune with regular people. And in other words, in the ancient world, in Jewish custom, if you, for example, were afflicted with leprosy, one of the things that you would have to do as you went down the street, because you could travel in town, you had to yell out warnings to everybody who was around you that you were a leper. Because just by contacting you, they would become dirty. And so the lepers had to shout out a warning to everybody around them. And has anybody ever had a physical ailment that was embarrassing to you? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I notice some of you do have a physical ailment. I just want you to know, God only made a few perfect heads, the rest he put hair on. And so, maybe you need to run around yelling, hair, hair, hair. No, that's a musical from the 60s. I left some of you in the dust on that one, didn't I? So here's poor Job, and he's saying, are you listening, God? He's outside the city gates. He's got these friends who are just chastising him. His wife has said, why don't you just end it all, quit holding on to your righteousness. Why don't you just curse God and die? This guy has a bad, bad life. And if you are suffering problems, who do you tend to go to first? God. I mean, is that out of the realm of possibilities? I mean, we all do that. There are stories of war where an atheist in a foxhole who's being run over by the enemy cries out to God because that's a last-ditch effort, right? I mean, even those who don't believe in God will resort in a last-ditch effort to call out to God. But what if things got so bad you start to question whether God's even there, whether he's even listening or not? One of the things that happens is sometimes we come to the conclusion that maybe God does listen, but he's not listening to me. Why would we do that? Well, a lot of times, we deal with this identity issue, and we think, well, other people are good enough for God to pay attention to, but maybe one of the reasons my affliction or my troubles or my trials, maybe one of the reasons I'm going through these is because, well, even God can't forgive what I've done. Coming from a conservative background, preaching in conservative churches, I can illustrate this in one way. We have a tendency to be very, very anti-abortion in our churches, and for all the right reasons. But sometimes we get lost in the language, and we forget that that there's a lot of people, for example, that come to Christ after a decision like that. And we make such a big deal about something like abortion, or another big issue is divorce, although not to the degree that it used to be. Or way back when, we used to make a big deal about those who smoked. Or I grew up a Southern Baptist originally. And so not only did you not smoke, you didn't drink, you didn't dance, and you didn't play cards, and you didn't date girls who did the same thing, right? You know, it's that sort of message. But what about the person who's sitting there and they're hearing that? And what about if they're going through some tough times? And then they think, female, she's had an abortion, or a guy who got a girl pregnant out of wedlock, and the two of them decided for her to have an abortion, and they're sitting there and you're hearing all this grace stuff, but there doesn't seem to be too much grace that's affiliated with someone who's made that decision in the past. And they say, well, God listens to anybody, but boy, they make such a big deal about abortion or divorce or whatever. Surely he's not listening to me. By the way, does that fit with the gospel? Well, we'll find out. Well, so here you are, verse 21. And if you wondered why Job got in trouble, maybe this verse. You have turned cruel to me. You, God, me, Job. You have turned cruel. With the might of your hand, you persecute me. So now God's the reason he's suffering. You lift me up on the wind, you make me ride on it, and you toss me about in the roar of a storm. By the way, in the counseling world, particularly in addictions counseling, in criminal therapy as well, in prison, we call this victim stance. And by the way, I hate to tell you this, but our culture is geared for victim stance. We teach our young people to be victims or to think like victims. And that's one of the reasons why we have such a vast majority of our culture who's saying, what's in it for me? I need to be privileged. And then when something bad happens, they say, you know, I'm just a victim. The bad guys are out there all out to get me. That's what Job's doing right here. By the way, this is humanity. For I know that you will bring me to death into the house appointed for all living. So I'm going to die. I know you're God. This is going to happen anyway. Yet does not one in a heap of ruins stretch out his hand and in his disaster cry for help? Am I being weird here, God, that I'm crying to you for help? No, I'm not being weird. This makes sense. I'm in trouble. What does a person in trouble do? They call out to God. I'm calling out to you. So where's my help? Did not I weep for him whose day was hard? By the way, this is bargaining. We all do this. He's saying, hey, wait, God, don't you remember? I'm going to give you a reason to rescue me. Don't you remember when I was helping those who were afflicted? What about me? By the way, have you ever bargained with God? Yeah. You know, do we? Yes, we do. I promise you, God, if you get me out of this financial debacle, I promise you, I will show up at church every Sunday. A year later, well, you know, man, we've got this for the next 3 weeks. We bargained, don't we? Was not my soul grieved for the needy? But when I hoped for good, evil came, and when I waited for light, darkness came. My inward parts are in turmoil and never still. Days of affliction come to meet me. By the way, when he talks about those inward parts in Jewish culture and ancient Eastern culture, the realm of your thought was your gut. That's where you're thinking, actually kidneys. And so that's what he's talking about, these inward parts. I'm in turmoil thinking about this. I go about darkened, but not by the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. This is the one of the verses that gives us the idea that he's being outcast. He's an outcast. I am a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches. He's sitting outside. My skin turns black and falls from me. Could be an indicator that his affliction is leprosy. And my bones burn with heat. My lyre is turned to mourning and my pipe to the voice of those who weep. Does God care? Have you ever been there? Is God listening? Are you one of those people, or do you know somebody who's in this situation? One of the conclusions is we do know that there is a sense that God stops listening to us, that sin is an issue, even in the Christian world. How do we know that? Let's look at 1 Peter 3:7. I'd love to point this one out, and particularly in marriage counseling. Likewise, husbands, and by the way, verses 1 through 6 all refer to the wife, and it seems kind of lopsided that there's so much on the wife about right living and being the image of Christ. And if she's got an unbelieving husband, this is how she saves the unbelieving husband, is being the image of Christ in the marriage. But now verse 7 comes along, and everything that dealt with it, and it's only one verse directed towards the men, except for that likewise. That means everything in verses 1 through 6 also applied to the man. And then comes verse 7. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel. And for those of you who are thinking, oh, it's one of those fundamental churches, and they just think the woman's supposed to be barefoot and pregnant, walking 10 paces behind the man. No, you know, that's French for no, you know. No, it doesn't mean that. This idea of weaker vessel. When you go home, take out of your kitchen cabinet one of those coffee mugs. I've got a coffee mug in my office. You know, one of the great things about coffee mugs is they're big and they're thick, and especially like those great big giant thick ones that you get mostly at restaurants, you know, mostly it's country restaurants. And they're so big and thick you can drop it on the floor and it won't break. What this passage is saying, and it's idiomatic, it's just a way of saying things, and both Paul and Peter use this phrase in regards to women. Guys are mugs. Then go into probably it's in your dining room. We have one of these in our dining room. Well, we will have when we actually settle. Well, we have this china cabinet, and it made a 2,500-mile trip all the way to Montana. Nothing in it ever got used. Now it came 2,000 miles back to Tennessee, and it'll be put up in the the dining room. It'll be on display, and inside is cherished little china, and it includes these little tiny cups, porcelain cups. And what do you do when you take them out? I mean, they're delicate. Have you ever seen fine porcelain? You know, fine bone china. I mean, it's delicate, it's different. You treat it, but it's treasured. In this case, it belonged to Mom and Grandma, not mine. Just give you a hint as to who it's important to. But what I'm supposed to do is the way she thinks about that china, I'm supposed to think about her. So this weaker vessel isn't weaker in a bad sense. It's cherished. But notice what he says next. So treat honor showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life. And here's the phrase: so that your prayers might not be. What's that saying? Guys, you can be such a jerk sometimes that God stops listening to your prayers. And that's not a good thing. So sometimes God does not listen. And just a little reinforcement. The next verse is John chapter 9, verse 31. We know that God does not listen to sinners. But if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God does what? Yeah. Which is where we're really going. By the way, how did Job start out? You remember how it started out? God's bragging to who? Satan about Job. Job's a pretty good guy. He does mess up. These verses, these 11 verses that we just read, they're problematic. 12 verses, I take that back. But Job's a pretty righteous guy, and he does worship God. So that's not the issue. Sometimes it's attitude, and I just want you to watch this video.
Yes. What's it take?
Click on it. It should take it. Maybe not. Go back. Google real quick, John Meador, M-E-A-D-O-R, and I am second. And it'll come up on YouTube. We may have to throw that up. And by the way, this isn't their fault. I discovered this morning, guess what Windows did? They did an update sometime over the weekend. So I woke up, or I came in this morning, and everything was different. There we go.
I think I deal with the same disappointments people deal with when they don't see things work the way they want them to work, or they don't see God work the way or to the degree that they want God to work. They know He's working, but they want to see Him do so much more. When I was a young boy, I lost my hearing. I had some illness, and it involved a high fever, and I lost about 75 to 80% of my hearing. By the time I was in the first grade, my teachers recognized that I wasn't hearing like everybody else. Went through a lot of tests, and consequently learned that I had hearing loss that was irreversible. So I'm profoundly deaf, actually. Legally deaf, you might say. At that time, I was equipped with hearing aids and the whole apparatus thing. As a young boy, that to me didn't make sense as I was growing up, to kind of be the object of ridicule and not measuring up to everybody else, and to think that somehow something was inflicted on me that God could have stopped, could have changed that. Or He could have had that affliction happen to somebody else, maybe. But it happened to me. I didn't suffer physically. It wasn't that. It was kind of a suffering inside. It was a suffering of really not knowing the purpose for it, and wondering if God loved me, and then struggling with people, their reaction to me. And my struggle with that had to do with knowing who I was and having an identity issue, knowing where God was with all this and why didn't He change that. I remember praying many times and saying, God, why don't you take this off of me? You can change this. You can change this immediately. But God never did that. As I began to walk with Him, I began to realize that He was going to give me the ability to deal with it and to handle it. And so as I went through school and tried to, compete in classrooms where I couldn't hear the teacher, compete on the athletic field where I couldn't hear the signals, couldn't hear the whistle being blown, etc. I began to trust Him more to help me where I couldn't do it. And in time, that became a way of life. In time, I learned to speak more clearly. Even today, I can't hear the words that I speak, and so I have to practice speaking. But I find that He gives me the grace and the strength to do that. It took a lot of time, but in time, I began to look around me and see people that were in worse shape than I was, and not feel sorry for myself anymore, but realize that maybe I can encourage them. And so that's the way that began to unfold. I began to see the comfort that God gave me, the help He gave me, the reliance I knew I could count on when I relied on Him, His power to be there to turn around and encourage other people. For me, that was a difference maker, because it was able to It's me able to say to other people, God can help you through this. Because I've been there. And I'm experiencing that right now. And I can tell you, you can experience it too. You know, God may never take that hearing loss away from me. But I really have come to the point of saying, even though I know He can, I'm not sure if I had the choice that I would ask Him to take the hearing loss away. I'm not sure I would ask Him to restore it fully. Because then a whole door of ministry would be closed. Then a whole avenue of encouraging people would not really be there anymore. And so I'm just going to leave it up to Him. I'm just going to keep walking the way I'm walking. I'm John Miller, and I am second.
What a great story. I mean, can you imagine growing up with that disability, having those insecurities, but then being able to come to that conclusion? Isn't that powerful? That he speaks to a mega church congregation every Sunday. And his hearing loss is actually part of what makes him effective. So here's the main point. Change. Let's just change a few things. Let's ask this question in a different way. Or let's see what happens when we change, whether we even ask the question. Yesterday I'm riding around on the farm and I'm just looking at the fall colors, and when I say riding around, I'm on the four-wheeler. I go up on the ridge and just check. I mean, it's gorgeous. And I'm taking pictures. And I'm thinking about today's sermon and thinking about this change. Why is it this question never comes up when things are going good? Have you ever thought about that? You know, it's, oh, Lord, I've got money in the bank, I've got a great marriage, I've got great kids and grandkids, just you're taking care of me, we're living in a great place, I live in a free country, I can praise God for being able to gather together with other believers on a Sunday morning and not have to hide in a closet. We can gather openly. Are you listening, God? Does that fit? I mean, really, does that fit? Or change, if we're talking changing the timeline, because you change the timeline to when things are good, you don't ask that question, do you? Not unless you're a really, really negative, pessimistic person. And believe me, there are some people like that. I mean, there's just some people, it's the whole glass half empty, half full thing. And some of us are just, man, it's half full. Some of us are, no, it's half empty. It's a beautiful day. David said earlier, it's a beautiful day. Some folks would say, yeah, but it's overcast. You ask a farmer, it was ag out in Montana. I mean, and when I say ag, agriculture. And it's so true. Talk to a farmer about things. Yeah, it's a good year, but next year, we don't know what's going to happen. It'll probably be bad. Have you ever known a farmer like that? Or any of you ever been a farmer? Yes. Or, well, what about John? Change the timeline to after he had grown. And what a phenomenal statement. If I had the power, I don't know if I would want God to take this away from me. What had gone from being a weakness was now a strength. Or just think about the fact that we're studying the book of Job. I find this incredible, to lose 10 children. But then to get 10 more back. And to go through what he went through and to have this dialogue. Well, first of all, I just can't imagine sitting there in a pile of ashes with your buddies and everybody's telling you you're toast. You're toast. And then to have God speak out of the whirlwind and say, who is this that darkens my counsel? I mean, that's got to be a life-altering moment, right? But this was written down for generations. Maybe, don't you think that the fact that we have this book and it's written down and it includes all his little foibles, that Job is like John? And he says, you know what? After all this, I don't know if I want to change it. I wonder. So just change. Let's ask that question again. Does God care? Well, does he listen? I don't know. I read the Bible and that's all I see. I see him saying to a woman who is the handmaid of a wife who has been given to a husband so that he might have a child to fulfill God's promise. All wrong, by the way. All stinking thinking. That the answer to her is, I have heard your child cry, lost in the wilderness. And all you hear is that God listens. Exodus, he hears the people that are imprisoned and he responds and brings them out of imprisonment. You go all the way through the Bible and that's all God does, is listen. Does God listen? Yes. As a matter of fact, John 10. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. Who is this that's speaking? Jesus. What's the topic? Your Bible probably says it's the Good Shepherd. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. He not only listens, he knows your name. Psalm 139, he knows the hair on your head. Some of us, he doesn't know as much. To him the gatekeeper opens, the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. And I would say to you, I think it's still happening today. I think there's people who sit in pews each and every Lord's Day, and they don't understand this. I want to paint you a picture of a God who loves you. And that's all he does, is lean forward and listen. Our problem is, sometimes we don't like the answer. Or sometimes, most of the time, we just don't like the timeline because we're impatient. So Jesus again said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. He goes intense on here. I am the door. If anyone enters by